gonna get started, so find your seat. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Spiller. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the Enactus Club here on campus. I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight to listen to this lecture titled Motor of the World by Ryan Ogstad. Before I introduce Mr. Ogstad, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors for this event. They are the Institute for Humane Studies from George Mason University and the John Templeton Foundation. This event is also being facilitated by our very own Enactus Club in partnership with the Center for the Study of Market Alternatives. Also, a quick little side note, at the end of this lecture, there will be a survey. We will be sending you guys a link and at the end of the presentation. Also, at the end of the lecture, we will have a question and answer time, so please feel free to join in and ask Mr. Ogstad any questions that you have. Also, I'd like to inform you that Mr. Ogstad's new book, Man, State, and Liberty, will be available for sale in the back. Now, it is my privilege to present to you our special speaker for tonight, all the way from Alabama, Mr. Brian Ogstad. He is a professor.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Professor Crabb, for inviting me out. And thank you to Northwest Nazarene University. I'm thrilled and I'm excited to be here. I guess I should also say thank you to all the sponsors as well. They've already mentioned it, so I won't, but I'm also very appreciative and thankful to the sponsors for making tonight happen by providing the funding. I get to talk about the ideas of liberty and economic freedom at a lot of colleges around the country. But just a brief history, so you know a little bit about me. I have ties to NNC, Northwest Nazarene College, university now. Going way back, so I found an old postcard so I can kind of make it look old and dated. But way back to 1927, my grandfather showed up here and he has 4 years of high school when there was still a high school here. And then he graduated from college in 1935. And I also met my grandmother here. She graduated in 33. So I have my personal roots here. And I've had a lot of family and also since then graduate from here. And I think the most recent, unless I'm mistaken, is my wife, who graduated in 1993. So that makes tonight a little more special for me. Also, I've got a lot of family here. It's like I grew up here, grew up in Caldwell, so I got about 10 or so family members here. So that I usually don't have them in the audience, so that makes tonight special as well. And then the third thing, there's three things that I can think of to make tonight a little extra special, is that usually when I do this, it's at like a state college or a secular college, and the fact that it's a Christian college, it makes it nice, because I can share a little more openly about the connection between God and the issues of liberty and economic freedom, but I think there's a strong connection. So I get to make that connection more personally. Usually when I'm doing this, I'm saying, from the laws of nature, or nature's God, I can say that, but I can also maybe draw out a little more personal connection. So I'm going to try to do that too tonight. Ralph Schneed also is part of the Center for the Study of Market Alternatives. Is that right?
You got it.
That's a mouthful. But anyway, I have a connection with Ralph Schneed too. Growing up in Caldwell, I used to go into my parents owned the furniture stores, and he would come in there and borrow the phone because he didn't want to pay for a long distance call, which I found amusing because he was pretty wealthy. Anyway, I love the title of his billboard. This is his billboard out there in Caldwell, making statism unpopular. Because really that's what I do when I talk about the ideas of liberty and economic freedom, and you'll kind of get that tonight. If you're talking about liberty and freedom, well, the state doesn't look that good, so the state's not going to look very popular tonight. So, two things also about Ralph that I liked. I read a little bit about Ralph when I pulled up his foundation website. There was a quote in the write-up shortly after he passed, and said, Ralph was the one guy I knew who got up every day and did exactly what he wanted to do. And I love that quote, and I love that philosophy, and I try to, as much as I can, without the money, I try to do that. Without his millions. And the second thing was, that I really liked, was that in 1941, after Pearl Harbor was bombed, Ralph rushed down to try to enlist. And they told him he couldn't, that he had to be drafted. So Ralph said that was his first experience with, let me get the quote right, his first experience with the mindless government bureaucracy. So I can relate to both of those statements about Ralph on a personal level, but I think they're also deeply connected to the ideas of liberty and economic freedom, which I think will come forward in the rest of my talk tonight. Now my title of my talk is called The Motor of the World. Does anybody recognize that? Some of you might. It's I take it from Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, which is a great book if you haven't read it. It's a dystopian fiction about the world turned upside down. It's all, when you read it, a lot of the ideas I'm going to talk about tonight, and perhaps all, are embedded within this fictional novel. But anyway, within the novel, the motor of the world are the people who are the thinkers and who are productive, are the motors of the world. The entrepreneurs, really. So that's where my title comes from. This is my grandfather's pewter plate. I don't know, I had to show everybody. It was dated from 1913. This is the founding of the college. I'm not sure if it's that old or if he got it as a 1970 as a souvenir. Because he supported the college and all throughout his life. But anyway, when my grandfather and grandmother were here in the 30s, from 27 to 30s, that was in the midst of the Great Depression. And it's a time when most people probably couldn't imagine the great technological advances and innovations that would take place and lead to this massive human flourishing that we all are the beneficiaries of. I mean, our lives are so much better than 80 years ago than my grandparents, and some of you, your great-grandparents, perhaps. But life is so much better, so much different than it once was. We couldn't even imagine it. But, what led to that? Well, it was America's open and free society, I believe, which made these innovations possible and led to the dramatic improvements that we are the beneficiaries of today. But I think, sadly, a lot of that's changed. I think a lot of the ideas of a free and open society are not embraced as much today. I think they're embraced, but maybe only in the term, but not the actual definition. Because whenever I tell anybody what I do, I promote liberty and economic freedom, they look at me like I'm crazy, like everybody supports that, and you can't do that. That's the kind of the look that I get. But then after I talk to most people for more than 5 minutes about it, I've come to realize that, and I think they do too, that really you don't support it as much as you think you do. A lot of people, not everybody. So that's why it's important to share and talk about these ideas. The foundation, I think, even of entrepreneurship and individualism, which is the main two, I think, ideas that are going to kind of at the core of what I'm talking about, but the foundation of all of it is all of us, I think, goes back to the idea that we have rights of life, liberty, and property. And like I said, from the Christian perspective, these were given to us by God. In natural law, we always say, if I'm talking to a secular college, these laws are embedded within nature, just like the laws of science and the laws of physics, they're there. So, and I'll probably get into more to explain how, as we get on into the talk, how they're there, a little bit in brief. But that's the foundation for all this. If you take away the foundation that we have these rights, then I think everything else crumbles and we get into the mess that we're in today, and we take this away. Because when we take this away, we give license to the state to do all kinds of nonsense, regulations and restrictions on our personal freedom that they shouldn't do. When they go beyond protecting life, liberty, and property, it gives rise to all kinds of things that I think they shouldn't be involved in. And this is Samuel Adams, second cousin of John Adams, our second cousin. Just a little quote from him talking about how there's no legislative body or no man on earth that has the right to rule over the individual, to rule over you or me, that nobody has that right. And I think most of us recognize that I don't have the right to rule you or tell you what to do. And you realize you don't have the right to do that to me, but for some strange reason, we then think we can get together and give that right to somebody else to use coercion, force, and violence over us. But I'll get to that later, more of that later too. But I think that's the foundation, I think. The foundational idea of everything I'm going to talk about tonight has to be from that we have these rights. So talking about the mode of the world, and I'm going to list 5 things up here, but I think the first 3 really fall into one. I'm going to talk about God and man, science and man briefly, and then the rational animal, man, the rational animal. Like I said, these 3 can only be titled one, just my thoughts on man and how this is related to entrepreneurship and individualism. And then historic examples to kind of make the case why this is important to understand and look and view the world through this lens. Because once you see this, once you see from history what it looks like, there's really not much, and I'd really say this, there's no comparison. History, there's no argument based on evidence and history and facts to go against the ideas of liberty and economic freedom, but they make the arguments always come from someplace else, which always fall flat. Then at the end, I'll probably hit to, depending upon how we're doing for time, 2 personal examples, just to make it a little more personal, which are really more directed toward the college students, but I think you can use them and find a way to relate. There's three quotes I'm going to show you real quick that kind of make up the essence of the first section, the first 3 sections. And this is from Ralph Adams Krams, who was a famous architect, a renowned architect in the late 1900s, well, early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. He wrote a great article in 1932 called Why We Do Not Behave Like Human Beings. You can find it online. It's about 5 to 7 pages long. I think it's really good. But here's the quote from that article. We do not behave like human beings because most of us do not fall within that classification we have determined for ourselves since we do not measure up to the standard. So we've set this is what we are, but Ralph, Mr. Krams, is saying we don't fall into that classification we've set up for ourselves. And the second quote to follow right behind that is from Orwell's allegory, Animal Farm. The creatures outside look from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. So we don't fall into this classification. Then I'm using Orwell's quote to make a point. If we fail to do, and I'm going to get to in the third one, then we're no different than any other animal. And this is from Thomas Paine, Reflections on Titles. He's more famous for writing Common Sense or The Rights of Man, which everyone should read those as well. But in Reflections on Titles, this quote says, when men yield up the privilege of thinking, the last shadow of liberty quits the horizon. So, thinking. The reason why the mass of men, according to Krams in his article, don't fit into the classification of man is because we've relinquished our right to think. Okay, that's his argument. When I ponder it and think about it, I think there's a lot of truth to it. In my first section, I'm going to hopefully make that case. Okay, so the first part is God and man. So I'm going to, instead of just strictly going with nature and nature's law, I think we can start from a biblical perspective at Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So in the beginning, God's creator, right? God created. And then you go from chapter 1, verse 2, all the way through verse 25, and it tells us all the things that God has created. God's created, separated the water from the land, put the fish in the sea, birds in the air, animals on land, made all the plants. Then you get to verse 25, and it says, or verse 26, let us make man in our image. Okay? So, all we know, if you just picked up the Bible and you read the first 26 verses of the book, chapter 1, 26 verses, you see God is creator, man is created in God's image. So man is created, right? So man is made to be entrepreneur. We're made to be a creator. Then it says, let man rule, 26 through 28. The man is to rule and subdue the earth. if you're an entrepreneur, you're ruling and subduing, and then that they also be fruitful and multiply, be productive. So I always tie the premise of my talk is a man must think and be productive. But we can get that just from 26 through 28. That man must rule and subdue. He's a creator. He must rule and subdue, think, and be fruitful and multiply, be productive. And then as we go through the Bible, there's lots of other stuff we can get through. Ultimately, I think, I'm going to skip a lot of this, because there's tons of verses, right? There's tons of verses as you go from Genesis to the end of Revelation, but defining what man is, his relationship with God. And ultimately, I believe the purpose is for to love and serve the Lord and have fellowship with God. And ultimately, God's plan, creating us, is to get us to heaven, right? That's the mission, the plan for God. The Bible is about God's plan, but it's also a book for us to understand how we can fulfill His mission and ultimately make it to heaven and have a relationship with God. So I think that's the point. And I think to do that, again, this is me trying to make the Christian link for myself personally. I have to make the link, but then I want to try to make the case to you guys too. I think that's also the point where we have to then hold our lives, I think, as the highest value. Your life has to be your highest value. If you place anything else, and I know your minds, as Christians, your minds are already probably spinning, well, how can that be? But if you have a question about how that can be or why, you can ask me at the end. But I think it must be so, and because we're created in the image of God, and embedded within these laws of nature, which I don't think we can refute. Man is a self-interested animal, and then we have to then hold our life as the highest value. And when we do, it's not that we're selfish, but that we're self-interested. And what that looks like, I think we can go back to Adam Smith in Wealth of Nations, which was written in 1776. Prior to that, most people don't know this, well, unless you're in economics or someone like me who likes to read about this stuff, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So he's not like this self-interested person that says to ignore everybody else. So I'll get to the Adam Smith idea in a minute, but he realizes that we do need to be benevolent and care for others. So he says man is both, not just self-interested. But the idea of self-interest, the quote that's pretty commonly heard from Wealth of Nations is, I think it's from chapter 5. It's not from the butcher, the baker, the brewer, that they provide us with the beef, the bread, the beer. They do these things because they want to take care of themselves. And then when they do that, though, what do they have to do? They have to take care of us, right? Because I'm not going to come buy the bread if it's not a good loaf of bread. So, in order to meet, as business people, entrepreneurs, in order to meet my needs, in order to satisfy my needs, take care of myself so I can eat, make money and eat, I have to provide a good loaf of bread, good side of beef, good beer, whatever the product is, in order then to satisfy what people demand, meet their needs. They have a need, they want bread, right? So then they're happy and I'm happy, we both win. And all exchanges happen that way too, right? Every exchange is win-win. You aren't going to trade with me unless you believe you're going to win. You're going to receive a higher, greater value than you give up to get it. We won't. We don't. Anything in life, I don't think. We don't make the exchange unless we believe we are going to win. And both, it's true for both parties. Both parties. You don't give your $5 to the bread store to get your bread products if you don't value the bread at a higher level than you do the $5. The bread store doesn't give you the bread products unless they value $5 greater than the bread products. Every trade happens that way. And to make a larger point about this, the goodness of self-interest and how it helps others is Bill Gates. Bill Gates was the founder of Microsoft. Bill Gates didn't found Microsoft and make his Microsoft products because he cares for us all so much and loves us all so much, right? He doesn't even know who I am. But he made the products because he believed he could make a profit, make some money, right? And we tend to think of that, at least outside of maybe an entrepreneurship club or a business club, as maybe a bad thing. That, oh, you're just greedy, trying to make money off people. But remember what I just said. You cannot make a trade for something. I'm not going to buy Microsoft if it's not any good. If it's not going to make my life better, I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to make the exchange, right? Well, Bill Gates made something like $100 billion. $100 billion. He made a lot of money selling his products, right? He made a lot of money. But we traded with him freely, right? No one put a gun to our head and saying, make us buy these things. And all of us buying Microsoft products, we have in turn, using the products, all of us have made trillions of dollars. So we both estimated correctly. He made a boatload of money, society's made a boatload of money, and I think outside of Bill Gates, I can think of few people who have made more people's lives better on planet Earth. Because bringing up a level of wealth like that makes everybody's life better. Makes even the poorest among us much better. Would you rather be poor, today in America, or would you rather be poor today in a third world country, or be poor in 80 years ago when my grandpa was in college here? So it makes everybody, and think about the poor among us. There's nobody really poor in America. There are some. But even the poor people in America, they all have what? They all have cell phones, flat screen TV, central heat and air, probably a refrigerator. Their lives are so good. The lives of the poor today are so much better than the wealthy of 80 years ago. So that's possible because of entrepreneurs, the freedom to trade, and being self-interested, and looking out for yourself, not being selfish. There's a difference. And I always draw the difference this way. I know Ayn Rand likes to call it the virtue of selfishness, but I call it self-interest. Because people always have this negative thing in their mind about selfishness. So I say, I'm not going to use the word. I don't care how much they try to cling to it. I'm not going to use it, and I'm not going to cling to it. Because nobody likes it. So I say self-interest is good, selfishness is bad. Selfishness would be like Bernie Madoff. He was the guy who ran the Ponzi scheme, trying to get people to invest in his investment products. Then as soon as he gets somebody to invest, he would get somebody else, and he would, with the money that he get from the next person, pay that person some. So he wasn't really making any money. He had this big illusion it was a Ponzi scheme. That's selfish, because in the end, all it did was destroy his life. He made hundreds of millions of dollars scamming people, but in the end, he lost all of his houses, lost all of his airplanes, lost his business, and who turned him in? It was his sons. So his son, he was lying to his family, lying to his wife, lying to everybody in order to pull off this elaborate scheme. Think of how miserable you have to be to try to carry out all those lies. But in the end, I like what was said about it. He says he's happier now in prison in his little, I don't even know how big those cells are, but there's nothing in those little cells, right? There's a sink and a bed, probably a toilet, and that's it. He says he's happier now than when he was living the high life, carrying out this elaborate scheme, living to everybody. That's selfishness. That's harming people. That's not self-interest. Self-interest, because that's, see if I draw a more personal example. If I help my daughter study, I give up an hour, right? I give up an hour of my time if it takes me an hour, okay? So it's not really selfless of me to give that hour up, as much as we may like to think it's selfless of me to do it, right? I value my daughter, value my children, and I value my relationship with them, and one day they're going to have to take care of me, right? So I have there's self-interest involved in this. Really there is. We may not think that deeply about it all the time. We don't. But there is. It's an exchange. I'm giving you value, you're giving me value. Even though we don't always think of it that way, because it seems kind of cold. But I think there is a difference. So when I talk about self-interest, I don't think we're being selfish. It's like being a drug user. That's self-destructive. You're doing something short-term gain, you get a short-term high, which is really self-destructive, right? It's going to harm you in the long run after today. So that's why I split the difference off. The science part of it, then I kind of like to think, I want to draw a connection also to individualism. So, if you look around the room, and feel free to, I know it's kind of awkward, but feel free to look around to your left, to your right, and look at everybody, and notice how similar you are to everybody, right? You're pretty similar. We're all about 99% the same. I'm not a science expert, but that's what I read. I don't teach science, I teach economics. But we're about 99% the same. So that should make us feel pretty common, right? Pretty much like everybody else. But in a genome of over 3 billion letters, even a 10% difference can translate into over 3 million spelling differences. If I got that right. Get the right name. Something like that. There's a huge amount of difference. There's a huge amount of difference anyway. So even 1% can translate into this huge difference. Get my science right. So think about that. There's nobody in this room exactly like you. You're the only one, in nature or nature's God, like you. You're the only one on planet Earth. So that should make you feel pretty special in of itself. And the second part of it is it's also an inescapable fact that every individual is highly distinctive in respect to the numbers and distribution of nerve endings. So we're highly distinctive with numbers and distribution of nerve endings. So from our eyes, to our nose, to our mouth, to our ears, to our skin. So, and what are our nerve endings? It's our access point to everything that's outside of our being, right? So if our nerve endings are, if we don't have the same quantity, same in dispersion, how we take in and understand and view the world and make sense of the world is going to be very unique to each and every one of us. Nobody's going to see the world quite like I do, for good or bad. No one's going to see it quite that way, and just like you. So every single one of us, being uniquely made, seeing the world in our own unique way, I think has something very unique to offer. And then when we don't express that, we're denying humanity of something perhaps very special. And I would say it is no matter what, right? Because that's you. So that goes to the science of the individual. I think we can prove that we are individuals and that we see the world uniquely. This is The Thinker by Rodin. He created it from Dante's Divine Comedy, and he's sitting outside the gates of hell, which I think is very appropriate for this part of my talk. Man must be, Aristotle said man must be the rational animal. Okay, man must be the rational animal. Man must be a thinker. And this is kind of like the nature part of it, man in nature, how we can, maybe you can tie some of man's uniqueness via nature. Because man as an animal is unique in nature to all other animals. We aren't an inanimate object like a rock. We aren't a plant or a tree that's dependent upon the environment for survival. We're not like any other animal, relying upon instinct and imitation alone, right? Man is uniquely who man is in nature. Man must think. So, if you think about it from the very basic level, it's a little different for us today, right? I don't have to worry about outrunning leopards. I just don't. But, go back. Man naked alone in the wilderness, we have to figure out how we're going to get away from the leopards, right? I can't outrun him. He's going to run me down and eat me, right? So I have to think or I'm dead. How am I going to survive in this world? So man's not the fastest animal. Same thing. Naked and alone in the wilderness, we aren't the strongest animal. The only way we survive is if we figure out how to get away from the grizzly bear. Look at us. If we don't have our minds, we're really pretty pathetic, right? We're slow, we're weak. We're going to have a lot of trouble surviving without our minds. So, we have basically two options. We can either think or we can not think. We can either be the rational, thinking animal, or we can let our minds lie idle. But to support our highest value, which is our life, right? We got to, like I said, go back, think about what I just said. We got to survive in nature, so we are think about that. If you aren't self-interested, you're going to get eaten, right? How am I going to survive? I got to look out for myself. So to support our highest value, we must think, and then man is the only animal then that's productive, right? There's no other animal that that has moved and produced and moved their lives like we have, right? No animal can think and reason and produce and move beyond imitation and instinct and going from season to season, cycle to cycle. But we have to accept these, we have to accept this by choice. We have to choose to think and choose to be productive. And I think we can tie that back to my opening with Genesis 2, in that God created man to be in his image,